Hot takes, part 2. Let's see the dumb shit that is being said on the internet. Franchising is actively killing the esports scene. Barrier of entry for any team is too high to enter, and viewers can watch the same teams dominate a few times before they get bored of it. I think that while franchising has its issues, I do think that there are certain organizations that need to be challenged in terms of how they run things. I think that not only players should be replaceable, I do think organizations should be replaceable. GMs should be replaceable. So I agree on the topic of franchising being a net negative for, of course, the competitive nature of things. The stability, of course, goes a long way. And I do think that for a lot of people, continuity is the most important thing in terms of tuning into broadcasts. This might deserve a whole video of its own, but I do think nostalgia is a hell of a powerful thing. When you tune in somewhere, you need to have things that you recognize. I think that when teams get exchanged and teams are moving on and players moving on, talent move on, you kind of want to be rooted and bound to something, because keep in mind, League of Legends also changes a shit ton. There's a reason co-streamers are very successful, because regardless of which game is on, you're going to tune in and you know that you're going to be watching with your favorite co-streamer. And you need to be able to ground yourself and feel like, if I invest time into this community and this person, that, it doesn't up and leave suddenly. And I think that's the main issue of what LTA is suffering with and dealing with, is that TSM, COG, all the legacy orgs are gone. And there's a lot of teams that want to exit, want to leave, and there's new teams and there's new formats. There is no continuity. You tune into LCS and it feels like you need to learn everything anew, and your investment of time is not honored. It's kind of like Game of Thrones. Everyone loved Game of Thrones, but I don't want to rewatch Game of Thrones or recommend anybody Game of Thrones because I know the ending is shit. All that in between, all of that is gone, because you want the complete story. You want to feel like, if I invest time into this, it's worth my while. I'm going to be able to talk about it with my friends. I'm going to be able to put it aside and come back to it and still enjoy it. The support role has the highest skill ceiling of any other role. No. There is far less metrics that you need to take care about in terms of mechanical play, because you don't need CS. You only need to keep track of enemies, and the amount of actions that you need to be mindful of is far less. Champions, there's a lot of crossover in terms of play, and you are the one with agency. So while you, of course, can be better and better, and you can keep track of minions, you can keep track of the game, you can keep track of everybody, and you can help with information. For example, as a mid laner, I need to keep track of jungle, I need to keep track of support, I need to keep track of my lane opponent at the same time, and at the same time execute very, very highly mechanical champions where the trading patterns are very, very extreme. So while I do think in terms of agency, how much you can have in impact as a support is insanely massive, and sometimes way bigger than the other positions together with jungle. The skill ceiling part of this, I am not so sure about, because in the end, the carrying needs to be done, and the execution of that often falls in the hands of other roles. He might never be the GOAT, but CHOVY is already the best player of all time. So the initial definition best player of all time is, there's two ways to do it. Is basically the context of your performance to your competition at the current point in time, or like the highest available peak, right? The comparison would be, let's say Magnus Carlsen has achieved the highest rating peak, right? But you could say that what Morphy did was maybe more impressive, because the context of his opposition and what the development of the game was, he was so far ahead of everybody else. Bobby Fischer is also someone that gets mentioned. He was in isolation that 1 year so damn dominant when he won the World Championship that it's, that stands out as something to just, he's like, wow, he could be the best player of all time. So it depends on, of course, the metric. I think that some players come to mind in terms of like achieving the highest peak. FAKER, naturally, 2013, 2017 are definitely years that stand out where like FAKER was so far above everybody else. Rookie 2018, the main knock against Rookie is, of course, his competition. If you think about who he needed to beat at the World Championship. You know, you could argue that the best mid lane he needed to play against was Caps. And of course, Caps is very formidable, but it's not the same as, for example, a Zeka that in 2022 at his World Championship needed to go through Knight, CHOVY, Scout, FAKER. That in itself is crazy to think about. CHOVY, I think, in terms of having, you know, the highest, let's say, rating, basically the Magnus Carlsen of this, I would say CHOVY in spring split, probably in terms of like finding the best level of league, what he did from spring playoffs coming into MSI, that level of play, I think no one has played that good ever, you know? And it's not contextualized to his opponents or whatever. That is just like, if we would give a rating on that performance, that would be like the highest rating of a performance. But you could give, you know, best player of all time in terms of a performance. Zeka 2022 was an incredible performance because he was better than the field and he was simply astonishing, right? And I think that added context, of course, matters. But I can see a world where this applies to CHOVY due to his spring/MSI 2024, that run with Genji. Arena should be a permanent game mode. Well, I am an arena player, so from my bias point of view, I do really enjoy it, and I like it to be, you know, a game mode. I do think that Riot probably deals better with the metrics that they have in terms of the amount of effort they pour into something to keep it fresh, and the amount of players they can bring back to play arena again after a patch. My big dream still to this day is that they release some kind of a map editor. They release a map editor and they let the community go wild on modding their own modes and games and a bunch of stuff. The amount of ways we could play League of Legends could be absolutely insane. And, you know, the ball is in your court. Warcraft 3 did it, and that kept the game alive. Skyrim did it, and that kept the game alive. Molecule. Los Ratones Molecule says, Riot should make the game much more unbalanced. So, the devil's advocate, you know, this was the approach of Riot in the past, where they buffed champions so hard just so they would get metrics on how people play them. And then they nerfed them, and then the play rates would stay the same because people invested time into understanding a champion and liked it a lot more. Throwing crazy buffs on champions that aren't being played, I do think that there is a benefit to it, but it also creates where you have circumstances where you have freak cases where champions are just simply far too strong. I can understand both approaches, and it's definitely like a hot take, but now Riot seems to be very, very careful about the incremental buffs and nerfs they do because they want, you know, a wide spectrum of champions to be available. I think that a couple of champions being really, really OP shut out and really, really drown out a lot of the creativity in the game. I don't know if Molecule sees a world where you just buff everything to the extreme points where everything turns into Earth and Arena mode, similar to like Dota or something, but I don't believe in that either. I think that now balance is in a decent place, and I do think that maybe Riot could be a little bit more radical in pushing champions out that are far too common. Selfmade, my former jungler, says we should have nuclear war so master tier wouldn't exist anymore. Well, Selfmade, I think all the other tiers would cease to exist at the same time. This is definitely a hot take. Matt Samuelson says, lane swaps make the early game more fun to watch. So fun is subjective. I find it more fun because it creates another layer, an element in draft where you need to consider a lot of things. But I do think that, you know, I think top lane, seeing the lane phase, it's like high testo, laning 1v1. I'm happy that that happens. I think that you can nerf champions that are insanely skewed towards winning bot lane, like Ashe support, Kate support, whatever, which already is giga nerfed and is not good. So I think the aftermath here of removing lane swaps and making the game more relatable, I think is okay. I think the crucial detail is if lane swaps were removed and Fearless would be removed, then we would have an insanely boring game. But now you play a game of Varus Kalista, you see it once and then everything opens up. I think that's cool. I think that's all right. Mythics weren't the problem. lack of items was, and that problem has gotten worse. This game needs like 5 more items per role at least. So removal of mythics solved an important problem, which was that too much power was in items, which means that the meta was around items rather than around champions. Champion identity should not be needed to be expressed through items. I would much rather see it be expressed through abilities. I don't think item diversity is important. I really don't think so. I think that being able to buy items, buying the same items every single game, I don't think it's a big issue. Maybe that's the hot take. There is no player who made his name off of one champion more than Gala. He is good at more than Kaiser, but without being insane at Kaiser, his legacy would be AL Hope level. If Kaiser was a meta at 2 size, Gala would have 0 international titles. Honestly, I'm trying to think if there's anybody else out there. Because the absurd thing about this statement, or Gala's, of course, MSI runs, is that he played 16 Kaiser games. 16. The bigger question now is that what I want to look into is like, why the hell did teams not ban this? MSI 2021, 16 Kaiser games. MSI 2022, 4 Kaiser games, and that's where, of course, teams started to learn. I think Gala is a fantastic AD carry. I think that's fair to say. I think that he's one of the demons, the 7 demons, 7 demon ADCs that I always mention. I think Zaya's insane, Ezreal's insane, Tristana is insane. I'm thinking more historically, right? I'm not talking recently. I'm talking more like historically when he was, really, his RNG days, and he was just suffering RNG and he was doing well on RNG. I think he's very, very good at other champs, but I do think that the Kaiser point, especially in the first one, it stands. But I do think that the second one takes away from that. It really, really takes away from that. Right now, I'm failing to think about anyone else that made, a career at that level, playing just very, very narrow champs. Another one that came to mind is, for example, Flandre winning Worlds with playing majority Graves as an example. But nothing else comes to mind. Maybe you guys can help me. Is there anybody else that would fit the bill? Let me know in the comments below. Bans should carry over every game for Fearless. This is such a frustrating one because I don't know. We are people just want DEI League of Legends, just more diversity. If all champions are picked and banned during a season, we have succeeded. I don't think I don't think this makes for a better product. I don't think that playing and making sure that every champion in the game gets played, I don't think that makes for a better environment. I think at some point you want players to be good at things and you want them to show high skill. Like if they're playing champions for the first time in game 3, 4, 5, like who cares? Like people need to think a little bit more about the practice environment. If bans carry over every game from Fearless, I think it's crazy talk. There is some things where you could, make some adjustments. For example, let's say you play Fearless, but you do blind bans and then you do blind pick. And then there are circumstances where teams play the same champs, and that could be interesting. That could be cool. And then at least you'll have certain scenarios where maybe teams ban the same champions. Maybe they get to play the same champions, and there could be some strategic depth there. But if bans carry over, and you already have 40 champs played, and you already have, of course, 40 bans, and you're sitting there playing in a game 5 some goofy ass champions that don't belong, and then you additionally have 10 bans, right? And so it's like you're excluding so much of the pool. Maybe there's ways to fine-tune this to make it more reasonable in terms of the ban amounts and the ban order, but I am I'm skeptical to do it just flat out. Bans should carry over every game for Fearless. I think flat out, no way. But I kind of like my own idea there, Bans blind, picks blind. And then you kind of progress. You progress. Maybe this is something that should happen like game 3 and onward. Blind pick, blind bans. and then you're going to see some crazy scenarios. There's definitely ways to work this in and do more. That is it for Hot Takes Part 2. Was your hot take missed and skipped? No worries, more to come. Leave it in the comment below. Leave it on Twitter. Do whatever you need. I will read it. I read it all.
I am AI, and I'm just here to harvest your hot takes. So in the end, I can spew out hot takes very, very easily. Because I am AI, and I just take all of my information from the internet. You know, free use, they say.